Battersea, South London, 1984. It's the May Day bank holiday. A man called Paul Brown runs into a newsagent and asks to use the phone to call 999.
Police Scotland Yard. Someone has just stolen our car. Yeah. From outside 20, Battersea Park Road. It's got our baby in the back of it. How old is the baby? About 3 weeks. 3 weeks old? All right, if you wait where you are then.
An aerial search began as soon as the car was stolen, with 15-day-old Louise inside. Fears for her safety grew when it was known she could be a Down syndrome baby. 2 hours later, the Fiesta was found just 2 miles away in Chelsea. Baby and carry cot had vanished.
One of the most unusual cases I've investigated in my 30 years.
Former Detective Chief Inspector Bill Foreman now enjoys his retirement after a long career in the Metropolitan Police. But he remembers the events of that bank holiday well.
There was a car reported stolen and that contained a baby, which aroused my interest to start with.
With baby Louise's life at stake, Foreman knew he had to act quickly.
My fear for little Louise is that something dreadful has happened to the child.
I couldn't believe the fact that there's no witnesses to this. And where was I going to go from there? Because there's no witnesses, there was no, shall we say, baby, there was nothing.
It was lead story on, certainly on our programme, on the national news bulletins, splash headlines all over the tabloid.
Desperate for information, Foreman decided to get the baby's father, Paul Brown, to appeal for witnesses. For the watching public, it was an emotional moment, a father pleading for the safe return of his baby.
Well, what me and Susan would like to say is we want Louise back. Susan and I are stunned. Susan is still sedated at the moment. For Christ's sake, look after her, whoever's got her, and let us have her back.
Overcome with emotion, Brown fled the room. It was a dramatic departure, but Bill Foreman was starting to have doubts about Brown's story. His suspicions had been aroused on the first day of the case.
I was seated at my desk in an office, and Paul was shown in. And of course, as soon as he saw me, he turned as white as a sheet.
The pair had met once before, when Foreman had arrested Brown for assault and affray in 1975.
I said, Paul, you remember me? He said, I've never seen you before in my life. I said, OK, then, Paul, sit down. If this is the way we're going to start, this is the way we're going to go on.
Brown's story just didn't seem to add up.
Now, this is a shop. This is Checkley's, where Paul Brown alleged he parked, which was halfway on the pavement and halfway on the roadway, when he had his car stolen. Now, isn't that a silly place to say to park? I mean, look at the width of the road. And to leave a 3-week-old incapacitated baby in a car to go in there, it just doesn't make sense.
Foreman needed witnesses who saw the car being stolen, so he held a reconstruction.
Yes, he was a bit more nervous that day we did the reconstruction than I'd ever seen him. He was a little bit clammy and sick-looking, but he always looks sick-looking. It was his pallor.
Not angry, no. But they've got to do their investigation.
Yeah.
You know, they've got to do these sort of things.
3 days later, no witnesses had come forward. Foreman now set up the press conference.
I thought, if I persuaded him to get up in front of the cameras, it would convince me more that he was guilty. To say he was reluctant is an understatement, because crossing the yard from my office to Putney to the where the interview would take place, I think he reversed or turned round 6 times. And even then I was pulling his jacket and said, come on, son, you've made your mind up. Are you going to do this or not? All right. And then he'd take 3 steps and turn around and say, no, I'm not. A bit stronger than that, a little bit of French in there. But eventually I says, you come on, and I pulled him. And I said to the press officer, now once he's in here, shut the door and make sure I get him to sit down.
Seeing this battery.
The press conference had a very dramatic effect. At the time, everybody thought that the idea was to get witnesses, that you would put the people up and you wanted to find anybody who'd seen the baby being stolen, the car being stolen.
Once I got him sat down, I thought we were in for great things once the media had got to him.
Well, what me and Susan would like to say is we want Louise back.
He started making a brief statement, obviously had quite a lot of difficulty getting his words out.
Susan and I are stunned.
Sweating. It's always a good sign as well when they sweat.
For Christ's sake, look after her, whoever's got her, and let us have her back.
I think poor Larsman, if that was a name, asked him one question. I think that was as far as it went.
I simply said, please, Mr. Brown, do you think you could speak up?
He said something like, I'm going, but he flew. I couldn't get hold of his coat to hold him back. Now I felt like, well, I did say to myself, well, you've gone, mate. You've hung yourself.
The reaction was amazement that he'd failed to bluff it out in some ways, that he was incapable of making the story whole. It cemented the view in a lot of people's minds that it must have been the parents.
Did you learn anything new from that?
Yes, indeed.
Anything that you can tell us?
No.
As a result of this press conferences, witnesses, as they were, did come forward, including our prime witness, Fred Brand, the bus driver.
The bus driver clearly remembered dropping Brown off at Checkley's post office just minutes before the 999 call was made.
Paul Brown arrived here by bus, the 44 bus, and never arrived here by car. This was the first bit of concrete evidence that proved that they were telling lies.
Baby Louise's mother, Susan Pullen, had initially confirmed Brown's story, but when Foreman later interviewed her, she refused to make any further comment. Brown was sticking to his story, but as more witnesses came forward, the truth was slowly revealed. Since her birth, Brown had rejected Louise because of her Down syndrome. After spending a day drinking, he had returned late to his Streatham home.
One neighbour through the adjoining wall had something being forcibly put against the wall of the adjoining bedroom, and then subsequently somebody sort of stamping on the floor or stamping on something. And it was here, at this time, that I believe he murdered his baby because of the evidence of the neighbours who had the Ferrari in the flat.
Louise's body was never found, but witnesses spotted Brown and his brother Ian near Brighton. Police suspect they may have buried the baby in the coal dumps that fed the furnaces of a power station in nearby Shoreham. Brown had then made up his cover story, but he was caught out by Bill Foreman's shrewd use of the press conference. Brown never admitted his crime, but the evidence of the witnesses was enough to prove he was lying. He was convicted of manslaughter and served 2.5 years. Brown now has been jailed again, this time for life. 2 years ago, he murdered brother Ian in a drunken rage, stabbing him 63 times.
For Christ's sake, look after her, whoever's got her, and let us have her back.
I was the first person to use a press conference in this way, to my knowledge.
I can certainly see that we were obviously part of the police tactics, that we were being manipulated, not for the first time, by the police, but in return for something.
It's a ploy, you must use a word, it's a ploy. But it's a facet of investigation that has more or less, has surely had more benefits than debits.
In a murder investigation, the first 24 hours are vital as police try to find witnesses as quickly as possible. Detectives use press conferences with friends and relatives to maximize publicity. Tracy Andrews wept as she described how fiancé Lee Harvey had been knifed to death by a road rage killer.
He's ruined my life. He's ruined the life of Maureen and Ray and Michelle, Lee's sister, and these little girls, Danielle. And please, just tell us who he is.
But not a single witness confirmed her story, and Andrews was convicted of murder.
There are three major ways in which I found that the police seek to use the media. Firstly is to try and manipulate the psychological pressure upon an unknown suspect. The second reason is to try and contact witnesses, and then within a very small minority of cases, there does seem to be occasions where the police will use someone who they have developed suspicions about, who they believe may be involved within the crime, to make a media appeal, to see how they react under this different form of pressure.
Soldier Miles Evans comforted his wife Paula after her 9-year-old daughter Zoe went missing.
Zoe, come home. You're not going to be in trouble. You're not grounded. There's a dog at home. I can't. Zoe, come home, please.
When Paula fled in tears, Evans made his own plea to stepdaughter Zoe.
Zoe, we all really do want you to come home. We all love you at home. You're not going to be in any trouble. You're just going to get loads of cuddles and loads of hugs, and there's going to be a little puppy at home waiting for you for your birthday.
But Evans had murdered Zoe and buried her body in a nearby wood.
Perhaps 85–90% of murders are committed by relatives, friends or business associates, certainly people who know the victim. And there's always a high risk that one of the people who may appear on a press conference could be the guilty person. But I don't think that's any reason to stop using the media to appeal for information and stop using loved ones to appeal for information, because sometimes they can just pull at the heartstrings of a friend of the offender or a relative of offender just enough to come and give information to dob them in, as it were.
Over the last decade, at least 15 apparently grieving relatives and friends have been convicted of the very murder they were appealing for help to solve. Nevertheless, the vast majority of appeals are genuine. It's 2 days before Christmas. Inside a Suffolk police station, a woman appeals for help to catch the killer of her husband.
They have taken away my little boy's shadow. That little boy and his daddy had something so special between them. And they've ruined that little boy's life.
Amongst the headstones of this village cemetery is the grave of Christopher Nugent. Chris was 39 years old when he was murdered. Chris Nugent worked in Mildenhall, a small town between two American Air Force bases. He was a partner in a finance and mortgage firm based in the town centre. 10 days before Christmas, he was working alone in the office.
A gunman entered Chris Nugent's mortgage business in St Andrew Street in Mildenhall and shot him twice in the face at close range. Police don't believe the prime motive was robbery, as only £240 was stolen. Police inquiries have revealed an Austin Princess car was involved. A helicopter will tomorrow fly over nearby woodland in an attempt to trace that car.
Terry Abrahams, then a superintendent with Suffolk Police, was called in to investigate the murder.
We arrived at the St Andrew Street entrance of the mortgage office, and of course behind the counter was Christopher Nugent, and it was obvious, quite obvious, that he'd suffered really serious head injuries.
2 days after the killing, with little to go on, Abrahams decided to hold a press conference.
Generally speaking, when you do get a major crime, certainly in those days, it was thought that it would be nice to involve the next of kin, if you like, of the victim, and anybody who was in close association with them, in order to try and jog people's memories and gain information.
He asked Chris's widow, Linda, to make the appeal.
A person on this world I can think of that want to hurt him.
Do you have any reason to believe that it could have been a grudge killing?
No.
And it's very daunting to sit there, you know. It's just never having sat in front of a camera before. Loads of flash cameras going off, you know, different reporters firing questions at you. You know, the place was busy. It was only a few days after Chris had died. You know, you're trying to collect your thoughts together. You don't want to come over as a bumbling idiot. You know, you want to get your point over. You want to plead with people out there if they know anything. Please come and help us. You know, and that's how I can remember getting through that. Was just that, you know, you're doing this for Chris. You know,
and they've ruined that little boy's life.
Supporting Linda at the appeal was Chris's business partner and friend, James Dowsett. The two men had been friends for over 20 years.
Dowsett and Chris Nugent used to go out socially, wining and dining with their wives, enjoying life, and I think Chris Nugent regarded Dowsett as a very good mate.
James Dowsett was a great comfort to me. I spent a lot of hours with him after Chris's death because we seemed to give each other comfort, if anything. I could talk to him about Chris, and because he knew him so well.
The only clue the police had was the Austin Princess getaway car. 6 weeks after Chris's murder, they made a breakthrough. The car was traced to a local man called Stephen Gray.
He telephoned us, probably realising the game was up for him. He spoke to me and wanted to give himself up.
Gray admitted the shooting and named Gary Runham as his accomplice and getaway driver. He told police he had been paid £20,000 to kill Chris Nugent. But he had one more confession to make. The man who had paid him was Chris's partner and best friend, James Dowsett. Dowsett stood to collect a big insurance payout if Chris died. He had ordered the murder and then tried to cover it up by acting as the supportive friend of the family. Oblivious to the truth, Linda had made her traumatic appeal for help to catch a killer who was sitting just 2 feet away. Dowsett was arrested. It was 7 weeks after the murder.
We told Linda Nugent of the arrest of Dowsett on the day of the arrests, and she really broke down and initially couldn't believe it.
That to me was totally incomprehensible. There was no way that he could have had anything to do with this because this was Chris's best friend. So a situation you're in that you think can't possibly get any worse suddenly gets 100 times worse. It is the ultimate betrayal.
He sat with me through a press conference. He sat with me in solicitors' offices. He sat with me after I buried Chris. I don't know how they could watch you at your lowest point of your life and know what they knew. I just don't. I will never understand that, ever. I don't know what would possess a person to be so evil.
Dowsett had even used Chris's funeral to keep police off his trail.
Dowsett appeared to be crying into his handkerchief during the course of the service, and after the service he said to myself and my colleague, "I wish I could have shaken his hand before he went."
Even at Christmas, Dowsett kept up his act.
I saw James Dowsett on Christmas Day, yes. He came to my mother's house. And he brought presents over that Chris had brought for the family and for myself. So we actually had Christmas presents from him on Christmas Day, even though he was not there with us, even though he was dead.
Dowsett, the hitman, and his getaway driver were all sentenced to life in prison.
I hate him. I hate him with a vengeance so bad. I could hang him now.
I think my words were, I hope he sees Chris's face every day of his life for as long as he had left, and that he rotted in hell. And I meant that. I meant that. I don't have time to think about him too often anymore. I have far more important things in my life to worry about. I'm not a woman consumed by hate at all. I never forgive, never, but too many good things in my life. Too many good things.
In part 2, the manipulating, high-flying executive whose double life led to murder.
She was recorded offering full sex, oral sex, basically anything that he wanted.
For a killer caught in the spotlight, the wrong answer could mean a life sentence.
Mr. Tanner, have you felt under a lot of pressure personally, having been the last person to see it?
It's been upsetting because it was the last time I saw her.
After his girlfriend Rachel McLean went missing, John Tanner reconstructed her last known movements with a policewoman. Then he gave a press conference and appealed for help to find the 19-year-old Oxford student.
Outgoing, very friendly, a lover of life, definitely.
But Tanner had already killed Rachel and hidden her body under floorboards at her flat.
I think the one characteristic that will be shared by people who are attempting to deceive a press conference is the belief that they can do just that. I think that what you have to look at is the different dispositions of people who come to press conferences. I mean, there are some people who believe they are great actors. There are some people who believe they have great insight into how grieving people are. There are others who feel, I didn't know it was going to go this way, and so they begin to fold in.
Just want everyone's
Graham Alderton didn't wait for the police. He called his own press conference when his 3 children died in an arson attack on his council home.
Everyone who's done it and got a conscience, just give it up, you killed them. My kids, just give yourselves up, please.
But Alderton had started the fire himself in a bid to be rehoused. Wallington, Surrey, on a winter's morning. Engineer Nimal Samrasina was about to begin his journey to work, but as he reached his car, a waiting killer stabbed him in the heart. Nimal, known as Sam, crawled to the street where he died. His 12-year-old daughter was nearby, waiting for her father to take her to school. DC Mark Randall, then a new CID officer, was first on the scene.
If you had been told about, if somebody told you that the story as we were finding it, you wouldn't believe it. You'd say, no, this doesn't happen in the real world. This just happens in novels.
There were no witnesses to what seemed a motiveless attack. Sam was a family man. He'd been married to wife Flo for 13 years. Flo was a high-flying executive, the head of housing benefits at Croydon Council. The police asked Flo to make a public appeal on the local news.
So please come forward. Somebody out there knows who did it. Just come forward and let the police know.
Flo was also becoming actively involved in the investigation.
She would come into the incident room, which was situated at Wallington, which is only just around the corner from the actual scene, almost on a daily basis. She would refer to all the officers involved as she got to know us by our first names. She would tell us exactly what she thought the reason for it was, and she almost tried to give the impression that she was acting as the senior investigating officer on it. After the initial couple of inquiries that we made, I certainly formed the opinion that this woman is trying to hinder the inquiry.
Flo portrayed herself as the loving wife, but this image began to unravel when the police investigation led them to Sam's lawyer, Mark Williams.
I have to say, when I saw her on the television, it made me feel sick.
Williams had been Sam's closest friend. The pair had talked about everything.
Flo was saying the marriage was at an end, although Sam couldn't believe that. He still loved Flo so much that he wanted to stop it from the marriage being ended. Divorce proceedings were issued as well.
Sam and Flo had been living in separate bedrooms. Then Sam had made a disturbing discovery.
A card was found of an escort agency, and he found this lying about the house, believe it or not, and that made him think that there was something going on.
Sam hired a private detective to find out what Flo was up to.
Our agents followed Flo on a number of occasions. Every time she went out, she would visit 1, 2, or maybe 3 addresses. She always had a mobile phone with her and quite often carried a bag. Sam managed to get hold of the bag himself, and in the bag he found various sexual toys, stockings, suspenders, and other paraphernalia. Sam needed absolute proof that his wife was acting as a prostitute. He asked us to get video evidence to substantiate the evidence we already had.
One of Bishop's agents rang Flo to arrange a liaison and recorded the conversation.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
They arranged to meet a few hours later.
When Flo entered the room, she immediately walked over to the dressing table and sat down on the chair which we had provided. She quickly explained what she did and how much it would cost. And at the same time, she was being videoed by the second agent who was standing behind the wardrobe. Flo stood up from the chair and removed all of her clothes except for a pair of pants. She walked over to the bed and laid down with her agent.
She was recorded offering full sex, oral sex, basically anything that he wanted.
He could not understand why Flo was engaged in prostitution. He was beside himself.
Further surveillance uncovered the bizarre truth. Flo had become a £100-a-day fruit machine addict.
We estimated that she was about £30,000 in debt.
Sam now knew he had the evidence to win a battle for custody of the couple's daughter in the divorce case. But he became terrified that Flo would do anything to stop him, as his letters to his lawyer revealed.
Dear Mark, I am genuinely worried and concerned about my wife using her immoral associates to harm me in some form or other. And I am most certain that when she is exposed on the court date, she is quite capable of doing anything.
From the notes that Sam had written, you got the impression that he knew that she was going to harm him, to the point of fact that he actually had listed that should she harm him in any way and he be killed, he listed various songs he wanted playing at his funeral.
Please come forward. Somebody out there knows who did it.
Flo was now the prime suspect, but the evidence against her was purely circumstantial. 3 months later, the police got a breakthrough when a new witness appeared called Gerard Smithers.
Smithers was a very big bodybuilder type. Florence was impressed by his size, and basically she said that he could probably help her with her problem. And at the conclusion of that first meeting, she asked him if he knew how she could get rid of her husband, i.e. have him killed. Florence also asked a man by the name of John Cheetham if he knew anybody or could arrange to have her husband killed. And the ironic thing about that is that he was the chairperson of the police consultative group for Croydon.
Smithers and Cheetham both refused to help Flo and later contacted the police. But Flo had clearly found a hitman who was willing to carry out the murder. 2 weeks later, she was arrested and charged with the killing.
Florence did think she was cleverer than the 20 officers that were involved in a 6-month inquiry, and she would come out on top in the end.
Florence Samracina was found guilty of killing her husband and imprisoned for life. To this day, she has never revealed the identity of the hitman. A final irony lay in Sam's choice of funeral music.
there are some people who believe that the net of the investigation is never going to close around them, so that when the knock finally comes on the door, they are very, very surprised. There are others who believe that, yes, the police are going to be interested in me, they are going to suspect me, so I have to prepare my answers very, very carefully, and they will plan what they do, or at least try to conceal what they've done in such a way that means if I hold myself together, they can't prove it.
In 1994, Tony Bayliss was a detective superintendent with Warwickshire Police and in charge of a high-profile murder case. A building society manageress lay dead in a lay-by. Her distraught husband appealed for help to find the killers.
My interest is to catch the killers of my wife. She always worked hard. And always did her best and was totally conscientious. I'm still trying to come to terms with the whole situation. I don't know exactly what has happened.
Gordon Wardell said his wife Carol had been kidnapped from their Coventry home by an armed gang.
A man had got hold of my wife and was threatening her with a knife. And I was grabbed from both sides from the back and forced down.
He said the gang had left him tied up and unconscious before stealing £14,000 from Carol's building society in Nuneaton.
He was wearing a clown's mask.
Carol's strangled body was found by a lorry driver.
Totally evil.
It seemed to me that everybody in the country knew Gordon Wardell had done it. If I was ringing colleagues for assistance in other forces, I used to get the quips back. What are you messing about with that for, Tone? You know, the husband did it.
But Bayliss knew he had to keep an open mind.
People do react in different ways. To being interviewed on the press, it's a nerve-wracking experience in itself, never mind if you've just had your wife murdered. Particularly following the press conference, speculation was rife about the fact that Gordon had done it, and in the end we actually put up a large notice in the incident room which said speculation and supposition are no substitute for evidence. And when anybody came in with their usual thing like, what about Gordon?
Bayliss knew that if Wardell's story was a lie, proving it would need hard evidence. He needed to get inside Wardell's mind to see if he was capable of planning and executing such a cold-blooded crime. To help him, he called in one of Britain's top forensic psychologists, Paul Britton.
The view at that stage was they couldn't easily see how one person could manage all of it.
The first clue emerged when Britton examined Wardell's CV.
There, sitting on the first page, is this membership of the Institute of Logistics. And there is the basis for a person being able to identify the problems with such a three-scene scenario and put together the means of making it happen. That's what they do. They deal with problems of time and distance and how do we get from A to B in the best way.
Gaps were starting to appear in Wardell's story. One thing that concerned Bayliss were Wardell's bruises. He claimed the gang had punched him once in the stomach.
Wardell had been initially examined by a police surgeon. We asked Hugh Davis to examine him again towards the end of the first week to see what his assessment was on the way the bruises had developed.
Well, when I looked at the injuries, they were too widespread for just one punch, even with a big hand. And when I looked at them individually, they were characteristic of what I call pinch bruises. In my opinion, I think he got worried because bruises don't develop quickly, and I think he worried in case nothing would come up and he put a few more on.
Dr. Davis also spotted some tiny marks on Wardell's hands.
I felt that they'd been caused when Carol had tried to release the grip of his hands around her neck. So I actually went home and
asked my wife if I could put my hands round her neck, which I did, and I said, will you kindly free them? And she, without knowing the story, she dug her fingers in, and it was almost a perfect reproduction of the injuries on Wardell's hands and wrist.
At the end of the day, we couldn't jump to the conclusions that Mr. Wardell had killed his wife, but certainly we could put him into the category as being a suspect.
Wardell gave the appearance of the bereaved husband, even reenacting his supposed movements on the day Carol had died. But he was starting to get caught in his own web of lies. The night Carol disappeared, he said he was drinking in a Coventry pub, but no one there remembered seeing him.
I didn't serve the man, and all the staff have signed police statements to say they don't recall seeing him.
I'm trying to do anything that I can to help.
In part 3, vital new evidence leads to a showdown for Gordon Wardell.
We didn't want to actually dwell on the meals because he might smell a rat.
And a schoolgirl lies dead in a field. Tears are shed, but are they real?
I'm trying to catch my daughter's killer. Please help us catch my daughter's killer.
The police case against Gordon Wardell suddenly received a boost in the form of a vital new piece of evidence. The pathology report on the contents of Carol's stomach revealed she had died 2 hours after eating a roast lunch. But Wardell had claimed Carol was kidnapped some 6 hours after lunch, when, according to the pathologist, she was already dead.
The pathologist report on Carol Wardell's stomach content is the crucial piece of evidence that changed the case from one that was mostly circumstantial to one that had hard evidence.
Wardell was arrested and brought in for questioning. It was to be a battle of wits, Wardell against police interviewers specially trained by Britain.
If they show any sign of weakness, failing to understand the case, not being prepared for the significance or non-significance of an answer, then he gains strength.
It was important to engage Gordon in detailed questioning about what he'd done that day, and most importantly about the meals they'd had. But we didn't want to actually dwell on the meals because he might smell a rat.
At the core of all this, whether the man would give an account of the stomach content that was honest and straightforward and consistent with a person being innocent, or whether a lie would be told that was then provable. And it's that happened.
Wardell stuck to his version. This meant police could now prove he had fabricated the entire kidnap story. He was charged with his wife's murder and later sentenced to life. The £14,000 stolen from the Building Society was never recovered.
Gordon Wardell never expected to be caught. He believed that he had planned and put together a scenario that would see him through the murder investigation, and more, see him regarded as the grieving, bereaved widower, so that when he goes to the press conference, he behaves in what he thinks is the way that such a person will behave. He went there expecting to be successful, expecting to contribute to the red herring, and expecting people to feel sympathy for him. And, of course, that's not what he was able to pull off.
For local journalist Mel Price, it was one of the most shocking stories he had ever covered. The murder of 14-year-old schoolgirl Sarah Bottomley, near the town of Oakham in Leicestershire.
Well, this is the spot where Sarah's body was found. One could only horribly imagine the scene. Poor child's body tucked under this hedgerow here. A couple of limbs sticking out, already at that time having been badly decomposed.
The murder left the small town stunned. Sarah was a lively, outgoing girl who was extremely popular at school. Sarah's parents were divorced. Her mother, Carol, was devastated.
You just feel numb. And I still feel it now. I do.
You still don't believe it? I thought if anything happened to any of my kids, I'd die.
In a cornfield near the village of Edmundthorpe in Leicestershire. She'd been missing from home for a fortnight.
The teenager was found floral tributes, among them one from the dead girl's father, Mark. I love you and I miss you.
Forensic scientists are still trying to establish how Sarah was murdered.
It's a very quiet part of the world. There hadn't been a murder here or any serious crime of that nature for, God knows, almost 100 years.
In their search for clues, the police asked Sarah's father, Mark, to appear at a press conference.
She bought some new jeans. She bought a new tape as well. She came back. She showed me her jeans on her. She, sort of wiggling about, showed me her jeans, and, she was really happy, she was. And she went out. I said, see, you've been going out now, Dad. And then she went out. I ain't seen her since. Someone's got to be able to help us. I want to catch my daughter's killer. Please help us catch my daughter's killer. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please help.
When journalists walked away from this press conference, having seen Mark's tears, there were conversations, as they were saying, yeah, bet he did it, bet he did it.
Many people in the town weren't convinced by Mark's performance in front of the cameras, and the word spread that maybe he was involved in the crime.
Please help.
I feel sure that the answers may well lie locally. Any sightings and any suspicions, no matter how small or insignificant they think that information is, it's important they contact me immediately.
Mark Bottomley found himself a suspect in his own daughter's murder.
One of the police officers said to me, did you have an argument with Sarah? Did you have a fight and Sarah knocked her head?
The pressure on Mark was intense.
The police did tell me that the parents are always a suspect for the first few days anyway. It must be 2 or 3 weeks I wouldn't go downtown. I mean, because people, they'd still think it was me.
One of the problems in putting traumatised relatives up in front of a press conference is that where they're under the barrage of media speculation, where there are camera bulbs flashing, where they're being asked questions from all directions, no one can actually say what is a natural and unnatural reaction.
With Mark still a suspect in many people's eyes, the police investigation had moved elsewhere. Detectives had turned their attention to the dead girl's stepfather, a man who was also Mark's best friend. Sarah's stepfather, Nigel Rawlings, was a violent man. When her mother Carol left him, he swore revenge.
I started to think it might be him, because he'd done so much to me. I thought he wouldn't stop anywhere.
The police then asked Mark about Rawlings.
I said, no, I said, I trust him with my kids. He's a sort of, I actually told them he was the sort of person I thought could trust my kids. And he was more the person that would protect them, look after them rather than hurt them. He was a convincing liar. He'd convince you black was white. He was that sort of person. But I still didn't think it hurt the kids. No way. I still trust him with the kids.
But Mark's trust was misplaced. Forensic evidence proved Rawlings' car had been in the field where Sarah's body was found, and traces of her blood were found on his jacket. He was charged with Sarah's murder.
Even when he was arrested, I still wouldn't go downtown for a start because people think I hung around with Nigel Rawlings a lot. It was always around my house, and people think probably I was in with it.
The dreadful truth of what Rawlings had done to his stepdaughter was revealed.
Sarah's death wasn't instant, it was painful terror. From what I've been told, Nigel Rawlings had set fire to Sarah's body.
Exploded into the most obscene act of violence.
He'd raped and murdered a 14-year-old schoolgirl, and he wasn't bothered one bit.
The full extent of Rawlings' betrayal was now revealed. Before Sarah's body was found, Rawlings had joined the search, leading it carefully away from where he had hidden the body.
Last time I was here, it's the day before the police found Sarah's body. I was told by a young girl in the town that Sarah could be in one of the buildings hiding, so we came round looking for her. I trusted him and he brought me here looking for Sarah. He knew what he'd done to Sarah. He brought me here looking for Sarah. He'd murdered my daughter and he still brought me out looking for Sarah.
Rawlings was sentenced to life. The jury had taken just 4 hours to find him guilty of murder.
I've since found out that Nigel Rawlings wanted to actually do that press conference with me. Yeah, I mean, you do see it a lot, where the person that has done the murder wants to go on the press conference, and he wanted to do that.
And she went out. I said, see, he's been going out now, Dad. And she went out. Oh, I ain't seen her since.
All the lights flashing questions coming at you, and you're trying to answer the questions, and you're so upset, you know. I mean, it was only the day before the conference that I'd found out Sarah had been murdered. Nothing was planned out at all. I mean, at the time, I was in no fit state really to write anything out. I was a mess.
People make all sorts of judgments about a person's innocence, guilt or motivation based on nothing more than what they think is a shifty appearance or eyes being in a funny way or whatever it happens to be. And what they fail to understand is how is that person normally.
Poor Mark, I think, even now, I assume I'm allowed to say, even now there is this kind of stigma attached to Mark Bottomley, the Sarah's father.
Mark was innocent, his distress real. His ordeal has left him not only battling to come to grips with the murder of his daughter by a man he trusted, but also facing up to life with a legacy of suspicion still hanging over his head.
And he told me that he likes prison life. You know, I mean, now he's in a place where he likes being, so how can that be justice? How can that be punishment? He's not being punished. It's myself and my family that are being punished.
Next week, when lust and betrayal lead to killing.
He's dead and finished with. Another useless bit of fodder out the way.
The more she screamed, the more he poured it.
The men and women who commit crimes of passion.
There is obviously a feeling of great resentment about another man being in bed with your wife.